Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's Saturday, June 12th, and we're breaking down this MLB DFS slate that we have over on DraftKings today. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you want to follow me over on social media, you know where to find me using the handles in the bottom right corner of your screen. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon and get access to some extra content and join the community, link is down in the description below. But you get projections, optimizer, rankings, ownership projections, cheat sheets, data sheets, Discord community, the entire spreadsheet that I am showing you here, not just the players I have listed. Link is down below for that. But I think that's it for the plugs for the most part. I do cover other sports. I did post a NASCAR video yesterday evening if you want to check that out. Really think it's a really fun DFS sport. I think you would like it if you did give it a chance. But I think that's it for the plug. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as per usual, we will start the pitchers and move on to the bats. And there wasn't a whole lot of pitchers I liked. I do have a handful of pitchers here. So we'll start up top with Corbin Burnes, $10,500. I imagine he is going to be extremely popular. I'd rather get different elsewhere. Like, this is just a great spot. And what we have available to us on the slate, Corbin Burnes is definitely the #1 option. And he's not overly expensive. It's not like he's 11 some $1,000. 10.5 is not really that bad of a price point. If you just pair him up with Max Fried, you should have a lot of wiggle room with your bats because there's some good value bats out there like we have pretty much every single slate. Like the pricing from DraftKings this year is pretty soft, so we usually always have some decent value bats to look at. But looking at the spot here versus Pittsburgh, they're kind of an annoying team to use pitchers against because they don't strike out a ton, but they basically have zero power. It's a terrible lineup. Yes, Hayes is pretty solid, so is Adam Frazier, but outside of those guys, this is a lineup you can pick on. But looking at their overall numbers this season, like I said, they're kind of stingy in the strikeout department, only a 22.9% K rate this season, but an abysmal 120 ISO, only a 226 on base percentage, 81 WRC plus, and Corbin Burnes has been fantastic this season. Has he fallen off a little bit from his early season grace? Maybe a little bit, but his numbers are still awesome, like a 1.97 ERA, 1.71 xFIP, 1.8 Sierra, 42% K rate, over 14 Ks per 9. He's walking nobody. I mean, 3% K rate, just over 1 walk per 9 innings. Like, he has been awesome this year. He doesn't allow any hard contact, only a 22.9% this season, less than a homer per 9, less than a 100 ISO given up, less than a 200 WOBA. I really have nothing bad at all to say about Corbin Burnes. Like, only a 2.75 implied team total, extremely heavy favorite, and an 8K prop as well. I guess the one bad thing is that he's pitching in Milwaukee. I wish he was pitching in Pittsburgh. That's definitely a better pitcher's park, but I mean, this team has zero power. I think Corbin Burnes, you should just lock him in, and if he has a bad game, I would be more than comfortable than just with dealing with that because I think the upside definitely outweighs the downside here for Corbin Burnes. And to be honest, there really isn't any downside unless you're playing a lot of tournaments and you're just worried about the ownership. But even then, I'd rather get different elsewhere instead of just getting instead of fading Corbin Burnes because I want to be pretty much all in on Corbin Burnes on this slate. Dropping down from Corbin Burnes, if you're looking for an interesting tournament option, I think Dylan Cease is viable here versus Detroit. It's just the age-old story of you can play pitchers versus Detroit. Yes, I do target Detroit sometimes as an offense in decent matchups when they're facing a really bad pitcher, but Dylan Cease is I'd say an above-average pitcher for the most part. He will struggle at times, and his ERA is pretty good this year. It's only 3.36. His xFIP is in the 4s, though, so here's a little bit higher, but even then it's not terrible. Although for a guy that's nearly $10,000, I wish the numbers were a little bit better, but still a K rate around 30%. Walks can be a bit of an issue, but doesn't give up much power at all. Less than 100 ISO this season, and I mean, Detroit's just lineup sucks. I will use Detroit sometimes as an offense if they're facing a subpar pitcher, but Dylan Cease isn't really bad or anything. And their splits versus Rays this season, 27% K rate, less than a 300 WOBA. The power is not terrible. They've actually been a lot worse versus lefties, but I think Dylan Cease should be fine. And he's a pitcher I like to use in good matchups. I think he had around 40 points recently. I want to say it was versus Baltimore. I have to double check that, but I know versus Detroit a while ago he had around 40 points versus them. Don't think that's going to happen again, but there is upside for it, and he's a pretty heavy favorite as well. I think the White Sox are one of the better stacks on that slate versus Jose Ureta, so I think Dylan Cease is an awesome option for the most part, but for $900 more, I would much rather play Corbin Burnes because you're probably going to have a hard time fitting both of these guys in. Then Max Fried, $7,400. He's your popular pitching combination is going to be more than likely Corbin Burnes and Max Fried here because it's going to be kind of hard to fit in Cease and Burnes. So Burnes and Fried just makes sense. And he gets a nice soft matchup here versus Miami, who I said the same thing for Charlie Morton yesterday, and that did not work out. He only had one some point, and I know my lineups was playing a lot of head-to-heads, And a lot of the guys I went against had Max Scherzer, and I kind of lucked out there because he got hurt like after one batter, I think. Might have been two. I think I hurt at one, but I think he hurt his groin or something. I think that's what they said. But ended up coming out and I had Charlie Morton. I'm like, all right, I pretty much won all my contests just because of that. Well, unfortunately, Morton only scored like one extra point, one more point than Max Scherzer. Now I still got lucky with my bats because Nick Castellanos had a pretty good game, and most of the guys I had in my lineup did very well. I was pretty heavy on the Reds, and they scored 11 runs. So, and speaking of that, they just let Kyle Freeland out there to die. Like he was getting murdered. I think he gave up 7 barrels, which was the most of any pitcher in a single game this season. I think he gave up 5 homers. Like they weren't taking him out either. I felt bad for the guy. Like they were just leaving him out there to die. Which, I mean, yeah, I know it's your job to pitch, but man, he was getting killed. I mean, and the bullpen wasn't great either. But anyway, Max Fried, lefty here versus Miami. I forget why I went on a tangent there, but I think I was talking about Charlie Morton. But looking at the Marlins splits this season versus lefties, they are striking out quite a bit, 28% K rate. They've had some decent power, 151 ISO. It's not great just compared to these other teams versus lefties. It's not good. I mean, we're using Pittsburgh and Detroit for examples. Like 151 ISO is nothing to run for the hills from. Less than 300 base percentage, 88 WRC plus. It's a good pitcher's park in Miami. I think Fried should be fine. Is he like the best pitcher in the world? No, but he's viable at this price point of only $7,400 relative to the other SB2s that we have on this slate. Also getting a little bit unlucky this year. His ERA is above 4.5, but his xFIP's around 4. So is the Sierra, 22.4% K rate. Walks around 8%. Gets a lot of ground balls, though, only 30% fly ball rate. But just the way the slate sets up, I think a lot of people are going to end up going Corbin Burnes and Max Fried. That's probably what I would do in cash games. And with that being said, I think we can move on to the bats. And as always, we'll start with the catcher position and work our way around the diamond. And we'll start up top here with Yasmani Grandal, $4,600. And I think the White Sox are one of the best stacks on the slate here. Love using lefties versus Jose Urena. Now, so far this season, he hasn't given up a ton of power to lefties, but overall, we know he's not that great of a pitcher. The Detroit bullpen's been a little bit better than expected, but I still think the White Sox definitely have the advantage here. And in the past couple seasons, Jose Urena has been an absolute punching bag for left-handed bats, so don't really think that's going to change here. So far this season, giving up over a 300 batting average versus lefties, only a 100 ISO, so not really getting torn apart, but I think that's probably going to come sooner than later, and I think this is a good matchup here for the White Sox lefties. You can obviously play the righties, but the lefties do grade out pretty well. And we know Grandal is a very good hitting catcher. Christian Vasquez, $3,800, going up against Steven Matz. Matz did struggle in his last start versus Boston. It's a hitter-friendly park. They have a team total above 5 here. Matz is an elite pitcher. Christian Vasquez, well, he's not like an amazing hitter. He's still in a really good offense, so I think Vasquez is fine if you are stacking the Red Sox. And then Tucker Barnhart, $3,300. So I'm a little bit kind of confused on what to do with the Cincinnati Reds. I do have some of the lefties listed here, but I don't know. I could see this going either way because German Marquez is a guy I typically like using outside of Coors Field because the guy's not a bad pitcher and he's actually been having a really nice stretch of games recently. But it's supposed to be hot in Cincy. I think it's going to be around 90 degrees. The wind should be blowing out a little bit, and we know we're in Great American Small Park, which is one of the best places to hit. So as much as I want to use Marquez here, I feel like I'm going to side with the Reds more. They do have a team total close to 4.8. Maybe that gets closer to 5 as the day progresses, but this is definitely a good spot for the lefties because if you're going to use anybody versus Marquez, I'd prefer the lefties. And again, great hitting park. You always use guys like India, Castellanos in tournaments, but definitely prefer the lefties here. And Tucker Barnhart, he's cheap enough, and I think this offense is definitely going to be one of the better stacks. And if they can get to Marquez early on, the Colorado bullpen is not very good. If we look at their team xFIP this season, if we go over to the bullpen data, so 4.61 xFIP, which I believe is the worst of all these teams we're going to talk about today. So definitely, if they can get the Marquez early on, it's only going to get a little bit easier here, and then everybody becomes in play for the most part. Then dropping down at first base, we have Matt Olson, $5,400 going against Kowar. I think that's how you pronounce his last name, Kowar. Either way, I think the Oakland A's are definitely going to come in as one of the better stacks on this slate. Olson is very expensive, but he's been having a fantastic year this season with an ISO close to 300. 157 WRC plus, not really striking out a ton. OPS close to 1,000, 280 batting average, and his first start did not go well whatsoever. He got absolutely rocked, and he didn't even last a full inning. Against the Angels, I believe he got 4 runs in 2/3 of an inning. Now, I think he's going to be a little bit better than that. I think we've seen, obviously he's had success in the minors, so I'm not sure he's going to get blown up every single time, but I think the A's lefties, definitely are in a pretty decent spot here. We'll see if he figured it out yet, but I'm definitely going to give the advantage to Matt Olson in this matchup. Very expensive, but I do like it. Joey Votto, $4,300, kind of similar reasons to what I just mentioned with Tucker Barnhart. He also went deep yesterday, although it feels like pretty much all the Reds went deep yesterday. I'm pretty sure Castellanos did. Joey Votto, Tyler Stevenson did at some one point. I don't think Jesse Winker, did Jesse Winker go deep? He might have went deep. I think someone else did as well. Kyle Farmer, I know he did, but yeah, I mean, the Reds just had an absolute launch party. I'm not sure it's going to be as nice today, but definitely think some of these lefties make some sense here. And then Mitch Moreland, he's kind of like the knockoff version of Matt Olson, but if he ends up batting cleanup here, they have a team total close to 5. No, his numbers aren't great this year, but it's mainly just a price play. I dropped in at second base. We have Brandon Lau, $4,400. Jorge Lopez has not been as bad as you would have thought this season. Like, his numbers aren't like terrible. I know the ERA is above 5, but the xFIP's around a run lower. Actually, more than a run lower at 4.23, 22% K rate, 10% walk rate. Still giving up some power. 180 ISO this season, so I don't think the Rays are like a full-on fade. If I had to guess what their team total is going to be, since it's in the Trop, like if this was in Camden Yards, we're probably talking a team total above 5 here, but since in the Trop, it's probably going to be in the mid to upper 4s would be my guess. But so there's still a viable stack, and the Orioles bullpen's not that great. And Brandon Lau, if he is leading off here, he's got some decent pop versus righty, so I think he is viable. DJ LeMahieu, $4,000. Vince Velasquez is a big wild card. He can come out hot and have decent games, but he could also turn into trash and walk some guys. And versus the Yankees here, I'm going to give the edge to the Yankees bats, and they're not overly expensive. Like, you can easily play Odor, DJ LeMahieu. Aaron Judge is a little bit pricey, but guys like Gleyber Torres, Gio Urshela, it's not that hard of an offense to stack. So LeMahieu is cheap enough, and he's also eligible at first base, which should help boost his ownership. So I think LeMahieu is a fine cash play today. Rougned Odor, $3,300. He is never a fun roster, but he's got cheap power upside versus a righty Vince Velasquez, who will give up some pop. I mean, Odor's terrible. Like, he hits for a low batting average, typically strikes out a lot. I know earlier in the season he wasn't really striking out a ton, but it's definitely increased now to 25%. Like, earlier in the year, I think it was only like a 13% K rate, but I mean, pretty much doubled that now. But does have a 168 ISO this year. So the one thing he will do well is he does have some power, but just know it's going to be pretty much all or nothing for the most part. But that's kind of baked into the price point, so it's not like you're spending nearly $6,000 for him. Dropping on third base, we have Jose Ramirez, $5,800. He's got a lefty on the mound, and Yusei Kikuchi, who's not a bad pitcher, but I'm going to guess the Indians' team total is going to come in close to 5 here. They've actually been playing some decent baseball this year, and their offense hasn't been terrible. So I think J-Ram versus lefty, which if you're looking back to last year's numbers, J-Ram was one of the best players in baseball, if not the best player in baseball versus left-handed pitching. So far this season, he is hitting for a nice batting average, but the power hasn't really been there. He's actually been better versus righties, so kind of flip-flopping there. But J-Ram's one of the best hitters in baseball. Doesn't really strike out much, has a really good eye. And if you got the money to spend for him, he's obviously the best third base play on the slate. It's just a matter of being able to afford him because he is very expensive. Then Kyle Seager, $3,800. I just realized I have these guys out of order. Should be Gio or Urshela first. But anyway, Seager versus Tristan McKenzie. As an Indians fan, I don't want to roster Mariners against him because I think the guy is going to end up being a good pitcher. But he can be a bit shaky. He's still a young pitcher, so sometimes he'll be on his game, sometimes he won't be. It is theoretically a good matchup versus Seattle, but I think some of these cheaper lefties are definitely in play. And it just feels like too cheap of a price point for Kyle Seager. I know he's not hitting for a high batting average this season, but he does have an ISO above 200, which does make me have some interest at below 4K price point. Gio Urshela, this is again, if you're just stacking up the Yankees, he's a guy that's hitting for a decent average this season. Maybe not a ton of power, but batting cleanup for the Yankees. Definitely think he becomes in play as their team total is around 5 today. Then Gleyber Torres, once we get down to the shortstop position, kind of similar play to Gio Urshela. It doesn't have as much power this year. The ISO's around 100 ticks lower, but hitting for pretty much the same exact batting average. They hit right next to each other in the order, at least projecting to here, and they're both decently cheap. So I think Torres is fine if we're stacking up the Yankees. I'm at Rosario, $4,000. He's been kind of on a hot stretch recently, and I believe it was like 4 for 4 or 4 for 5 yesterday. I actually ended up playing him in my head-to-head lineups, and I think he ended up with 19 points, got a steal. I think he had 4 hits, so if you just want to ride the hot hand here, you get a righty unlefty matchup versus Kikuchi, and I think their team total is going to be in the mid-4 to upper 4s, maybe 5 tomorrow. 5 might be pushing it, but I definitely think it should be close to the upper 4s. I think the Indians are definitely a team we can target. And then JP Crawford, $3,800. He's also been hot recently, and kind of similar to what I said about Kyle Seager. I think some of these cheap lefties on the Mariners would make some sense versus McKenzie. I think you could look at Pennell as well. He's dirt cheap. I want to say he's $2,100. Got some speed upside there too. And then going down to the outfield, we have Austin Meadows, $6,000. Super expensive. I remember Austin Meadows was like in the mid 3K range, which was a joke of a price point. There was a reason he was like 70-80% owned that night. I think he ended up having like a bunch of points as well when he went double dong versus the Los Angeles Angels. But if you got the money for him, if you're just stacking the Rays, that's the only reason I would be playing Meadows, because it's an expensive price point. Obviously not going to get there in cash games, but does have a 275 ISO this season, which is actually pretty impressive. Not a big batting average guy, but Jorge Lopez will give some pop, and it's a scary stadium to use batters against, but I think Austin Meadows is just a fine one-off play if you got the money for him. Jesse Winker, $5,800. I said I prefer the lefties versus Marquez, and Jesse Winker has been one of the best players in baseball this season versus right-handed pitching. Like, he has been absolutely elite. I mean, if you just looked at his right-handed pitching splits, that guy looks like an MVP candidate this year, batting .380, .490 WOBA, .358 ISO, .210 WRC+, 1100 OPS. Like, it's insane what he is doing. Him and Nick Castellanos, man. Like, Castellanos, he's got those kind of numbers versus lefties. Winker's got those kind of numbers versus righties. Like, they are just a great duo there. They're absolutely crushing this season. I don't have Castellanos listed here, but you can obviously play him too. I don't really have an issue with that. Aaron Judge, if you're stacking the Yankees versus Velasquez, he's a guy that will give some power. I guess I'd prefer lefties here, but you're not going to get many lefties in this Yankees lineup that are worth really playing. I know Brett Gardner's there, and he's dirt cheap, but I don't really want to play Brett Gardner. I'm sure you guys don't either. JD Martinez facing a lefty and Steven Matz. If you are just stacking up the Red Sox, we actually have 3 outfielders in a row from the Red Sox here, so I guess we can kind of group them together. JD, if you got the money for him, obviously he's the best overall play. He's been crushing lefties for years. Kike Hernandez, if he is leading off, I know he led off recently, so if he is doing that again, I don't think it'd be Christian Arroyo. If it is, you just adjust your lineups there. But Kike, if he is leading off, dude, like the Red Sox here, they have a team total above 5 here, which is currently the highest that we have talked about. So Kike would obviously be in play. And Hunter Renfroe, $4,000. The guy's not a great hitter, but the one thing he does well is he hits lefties for power. So he's certainly in play, even though he doesn't hit near the top of the order. Then Justin Upton, $3,800. No team total out yet for the Angels, but would not surprise me if it gets close to 5. I think you could use guys like Anthony Rendon and Jose Iglesias could be put on the radar as well, but Justin Upton's a guy that has had surprising power this season. Like, I know he's an old man at this point, but 270 ISO this year with a 124 WRC+. Like, the ISO is the surprising thing. Like, the batting average is low, that's not surprising, but I definitely like the power he's shown this year, and Caleb Smith's not exactly a world beater, so I think Upton would be viable. Then Adam Eaton, $3,800, like lefties versus Jose Urena. I know I didn't talk much about the White Sox, but I said earlier on when I was talking about Grandal that they're one of the better stacks in the slate here, but just kind of expensive. But you can always play guys like Abreu, Yoan Moncada, Yerman Mercedes is always viable, Tim Anderson. Just prefer some of those guys versus lefties, but you can pretty much play the entire lineup. But with that being said, guys, that's going to be it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check out the Patreon. Link is down below for the extra content. Social medias, you can hit me up over on those if you feel like you want to do that. But that being said, guys, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go to bed. It's like 2 a.m. So, again, these lineups could obviously change. We'll get more Vegas implied team totals by the time I get up. But I'll stop rambling. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll see you in the next one.